Welcome to another Requel Pitch podcast episode. Today's episode is a pitch for a reboot, but not a remake, a reboot. As many listeners may know, my favorite folklore type creature is the werewolf, and I've done my pitch for the Wolfman. Ginny and I talked about the Wolfman and stuff before, but this pitch is based on a already existing movie by Stephen King, which is the film Silver Bullet. Now, Silver Bullet is based off a short story kind of collection called The Cycle of the Werewolf. And I read it years ago. Jania bought it for me, and I was rereading it, and I've had this idea kind of cooking. And as much as I think Silver Bullet is a good movie, I just don't feel that it worked to really tell the story. And, even though this is like the smallest Stephen King written book, it's a little longer than a short story, but it's different. I still think the miniseries is the way to go. We've talked about miniseries, movies, and things like that, and TV shows. But Stephen King's works always led to best being miniseries or two-part movies or something, because there's always so much story with the characters. And looking at Cycle of the Werewolf, I'm pitching it as a Netflix miniseries because Netflix has done some Stephen King adaptations, and I feel like this is really where it should be. If you haven't read Cycle of the Werewolf, I suggest it's a quick, easy read, but it's a fun read. But the structure would be 12 episodes. So it'd be a miniseries, one season, however you want to word it. Or, 2 seasons, 6 episodes broken apart, whatever, a part 1 and a part 2. But the concept is, in the book, it's each month, and they're talking about the event that happens. And there are only a couple of pages. And so the idea is that the first episode would open, the episodes would be titled as the months. January, February, and so on. And it would open with the story for the January in the book of the man in the wood, in the woods being killed by the wolf. And that's our big opening, action scene hook that gets you. And then what we would do is we would create a character who is our protagonist, who is a young, new-to-town deputy sheriff. Or even the sheriff, okay? Or deputy. Let's do deputy. The sheriff's old. And that's our character. That's our through story. So the first episode, we have this, cold opening. And with the murder. And so what happens next is we have, we're introduced in the pilot, the first episode, to the town. We get to know the town, how the town works, very much falling into the trappings of a Stephen King style miniseries, much like Storm of the Century, Salem's Lot, where we need to know the people in the town. And we're going to meet all of our cast of characters who will appear throughout the months. Because each month we are introduced to a new character who is taken by the werewolf. And spoilers. So we're talking about rebooting a property here. The werewolf is the preacher. But we need to see the church. We need to see the church, how it works. We need to see all these characters interacting. And that's going to be kind of our first, episode, is building up this event. Because what happens, you can't have any type of serial killer-esque thing until there's a pattern. So this man is killed in January by an animal. And they we start seeing the investigation opening up. And each episode's probably about 35, 40 minutes, okay? And we start seeing all of our characters interact. And we're learning about the personal lives and all that type stuff. And then, the episode January starts. Cold opening. And I think of the cold opening kills being much like one of my favorite shows, Supernatural, in which most episodes would start with a cold opening of the murder, death, or whatever of the monster that the Winchester brothers would then need to hunt for the episode. Especially in the earlier seasons. So that's what we would do for the first, we would start these cold openings, especially for the first 3 episodes. Because by the 3rd murder, you start to find the pattern. Okay, there's a full moon and a wolf, and people start talking, people running their mouths. So then when you start episode 4, you can kind of start with this anticipation of, okay, people in town are getting restless. We start seeing people doing things. They're investigating, and we're turning up that small town vibe of trying to figure out things. Who's doing what? What's going on? So we don't have to start as much with the cold opening now, murder. We can kind of get to it to where the event takes place in the middle of the episode or towards the end of the episode, because you have that tension that's been rising, because now people are starting to notice this pattern in our characters. Our deputy sheriff protagonist who's investigating, getting worried about the town doing something dumb. Now, one thing that's major is the preacher doesn't know he's the werewolf. Has no clue. It's very much almost like he feels he goes to sleep at night, wakes up, and the wolf in itself has a tendency, there hasn't been any clues, and he starts finding little clues and little things as well, and trying to piece together things for himself. So it's very much in a sense like a Jekyll Hyde, where you don't know what the other person's doing, because that's part of the mystery. Now, one thing is, the book, the way it's written, feels like it's set in the 70s with some of the actor references and the band Kiss. This is where I would take my creative liberty, because the 70s and me don't always get along. It has some good music, yes. Some fashionable choices, yeah. I would set it in the 50s. We all know Stephen King grew up as a child of the 50s, loves the 50s, harkens back to it with his aesthetics and things. And I just like the imagery in that sense of pureness and squeaky clean America. And I love 50s fashion and looks. My grandparents were teenagers of the 50s and everything, and I love my grandparents dearly. I also love it because you're stepping away from a lot of technology, so it makes it a little bit more of a rough time. Now, what's neat is there's some fun that you can take mapping out each episode, like in, for example, Bay with the Reverend's Nightmare. There's some fun you can have with February, with just the style of directing and the way you introduce the wolf. But especially in May with the nightmare and the horrible dream. And, but this time you can kind of start to tease, with the nightmare of who may be the wolf or whatever. And you can play around with the audience expectations, because with having the characters, you can have it multiple people might be the wolf, or people are dreaming, the Reverend's dreaming, he's praying. So you can play around with that scene of having these wolves, and it would be an interesting way of, if we're approaching May as almost the penultimate episode of our part 1 closer. When we get to June, it's a really interesting diner scene. And once again, this could be in the middle of the episode. And what I see is we can pad out the episodes with building our characters, with the, teenagers, and events that go along with school, and like showing where other people are and what they're doing, what the town's doing while these attacks are going on. And I was thinking, like, if we know the pastor is the werewolf, let's make a twist here. Sure, the pastor is a werewolf, but let's start messing with the idea that there is another werewolf. Maybe it's the pastor's brother who we don't know, that he doesn't know. It's someone kind of that we just see in the background of some shots, maybe interacts here and there, but it's not one of our main play characters. And that's part of the fun of building this ensemble. And I'm working this idea in my head because that's the one trick about any time you reboot or remake something that was a mystery or has a twist. Most of the time, people are going to go in already knowing that. Or they'll watch the original before the new one, or they'll read the book, or people will start talking about it again. And we got to figure out a way to still make something interesting out of this. So I'm working it here as I'm going through my thoughts, but each month presents a new challenge. And I think if this is where we end with kind of a big massacre type scene in the diner, not just one person, let's have multiple people because it's horrible and it would be interesting. And we have a great transformation scene of somebody that we really don't see. And, as a director or whatever, you would not show the pastor what he's doing at the time of this. And we wouldn't really show the face of the person eating. And everyone's in the diner eating because they think in a large group they'll be safe, And we have the transformation in the diner. And there's like a massacre. At this point, if we're ending, like, say, our part 1 here, when we pick back up, people are paranoid even more. And they're starting to turn on the sheriff and on the deputy. And some people are even blaming that maybe the deputy is it because he was a new person that came to town right as this started. And there's a lot of, and they're trying to bring in, they're starting town militias, and they're patrolling the streets on full moons in groups with weapons. And people are starting to lose their minds. July is basically Silver Bullet. This is, you can see, it's the longest chapter, and you can see where they would derive the entire film from. Now, this would almost be, like I said, if this is part 2, so season 1, part 2 or whatever, or this would be almost like kind of like a bottled episode in the sense that we're going to be void of most of our characters and focus mainly on the characters presented of Marty, his uncle, and everything. And this would set up Marty having the first kind of big encounter with the beast and surviving and actually seeing it and trying to convince people that the full moon killer is actually a werewolf. Where he now has become the, for lack of a better term, sidekick of wanting to follow the deputy and partner up with him because he's seen it and wants to help. So I also think about, a few years back they did the Castle Rock TV series, which was a Stephen King based TV series that kind of was like a town that connected all these different Stephen King stories. The The second season was really strong, and it was a mixture of Salem's Lot and Misery, like a prequel to Misery with Salem's Lot and some other things built into the show. And I feel like that's kind of a similar vibe here, where we're building this town and this universe through this cycle of the werewolf here. There's other characters that might appear that'd be kind of fun just passing through, that are in other Stephen King stories. Kind of feeling like it's part of a larger world. August is when, in the book here, Neri appears. But he would be a character that I would have from the beginning as the other deputy. That's kind of your antagonist deputy. And this is where we're kind of turning up our town witch hunt, in the sense that they're starting to go into people's homes. People are getting panicked of each other. Any kind of fur trap or, anything like that. People, they're thinking that maybe they're making a wolf costume. They're dismissing the boy, Marty's testimony about hitting the wolf in the eye with fireworks, and they're asking to look for people with an eye patch or anything like that. And that's one of those things as a director you kind of play with, using maybe sunglasses or other things, trying to, hide the fact that someone has an eye patch. And you play into this with like the barbershop scene and the people talking, and you see the tension that when the sheriff's deputies are around, people are all afraid that they're going to get blamed for something. Hunters, people who are more woodsmen. There's talk about they had a wildlife specialist as a character we could bring in, who's talking about there's no wolves natural in the area. It's got to be something going on. People are thinking that maybe it's a man in a costume now, like a wolf. Episode August would be the idea that no people die, just the animals on the farm. And this is where I would see it a little bit, the idea going back that in July, yes, it was the preacher that came in contact with Marty as the werewolf. He shot him in the eye. So the preacher has the eye patch. Here, it's the preacher werewolf that kills and eats the animals. But this is where I'd start to play around with, there's two werewolves. There's the preacher that's not trying to harm, that doesn't really know that he's a werewolf, and then the other one, like I said. Excuse me. And that's where the interesting fun comes in, the dynamic. Because it's almost like this was a break of someone dying this month. October would be the month episode where we'd focus on Halloween. Straight up Halloween episode. Trick-or-treating, decorations, everything. No murders. This is just more playing on tension. But what we would do is we would see some of the teenagers being jerks and stuff. They would dress as werewolves and cause problems. Police are out on high alert. It's a full moon. They want to cancel trick-or-treating, but the town revolted against it. You have the police, stopping people dressing as wolves. We have kids dressed as pirates and adults. So the eye patch, and this is where we would find Reverend Lowe now with the eye patch. And this is where Marty would, just like in the book, confront. And like I said, it's building up the idea of who the werewolf is. But this episode would be fun because we played to all the Halloween monsters and aesthetics. The full moon on Halloween night, perfect. November, our penultimate, is basically the Reverend coming undone, realizing that he is a wolf. Not realizing that he hasn't done everything, but he is psychologically battling himself, the revelation of how Marty looked at him on Halloween, the note that he received about killing yourself, clues that he's finally pieced it together, and he doesn't know when, how, or what's happened. And he goes, he flees to the hotel. He finds the cheating husband and the cheating wife, adulterers, and he's making the change, and we start to see him actually changing in the hotel room. And through some quick, cool directing and styling, we see a wolf attack and kill the couple. And that leads us to our last episode, which is December. December would play out. It would be kind of a compression of time. We would have a memorial service at the beginning in the church because it's New Year's Eve. It's the end of December. We would still see Christmas decorations and things sprung out. We would kind of catch up with all of our characters and see who all is left. Our sheriff deputy is there. We have Marty and Uncle Al back. Like I said, Marty's been pounding around the sheriff, our protagonist. And this is where it starts out, that Marty thinks it's the preacher, Reverend Lowe, and he confronts him. And we would basically have this memorial service, and then Marty, we would have two things going on at once. We would have Reverend Lowe going to Marty's house to try to talk with him and Uncle Al after the service, and basically try to tell him that he knows he's a werewolf, but he didn't do these things, and how could he, and plead. But he turns, and Marty ends up killing the Reverend. Meanwhile, the sheriff deputy shows up, and we have the other wolf show up and talk about how they murdered his brother, his younger brother, and that basically you have the big revelation there was the second wolf, and that he was the one doing everything, and the younger brother wasn't. And that the younger brother, basically, it's like an identity thing where Reverend Lowe never accepted for who he was or what he was. And over the years, I tried to suppress it and keep it back, but the beast needed its day. And ever since his brother showed back up, they hadn't actually confronted, but he was just in proximity. The beast was growing stronger in the Reverend. And then this is where we have our big fight, and the townspeople see this wolf, and our protagonist kills it, and only the deputy knows the truth, him, Uncle Al, and Marty, and they blame the death of Reverend Lowe kind of on a mishap of him with Marty. And in the book it happens in Marty's home, but we could kind of have it happen. The home still works. I think the church might be cool, or we have the Reverend's home maybe, so that we can have this neutral place where all of our characters are. And the idea that, the Reverend is able to go out without the people knowing and think that he was like the last victim of just an accident while they were trying to stop the wolf. But that is my long pitch for Cycle of the Werewolf. It would be fun to sit down and actually break the story, create the characters, and move in and out of each one. But I think it would be an amazing miniseries to a book that has a great idea and could be something unique. Let me know your thoughts.